pain point for ratepayers is being fixed. The government's introducing rates caps to keep costs down.
Our message to councils is clear: focus on the basics, live within your means.
But councils are warning of trade-offs ahead.
It will mean that we are saying no to our communities more often, and it will mean that we are deferring projects that they wanted to see go ahead.
Kia ora, ko Giles Dexter aho, ane te pūrongo tōranga pū mō tēnei wiki. Welcome to Focus on Politics. With their feet barely under the desks, councils have already had a lot thrown at them since their new terms began. Last week's announcement that regional councils could be abolished was only the start. Councils knew something else was coming imminently. For more than a year, the government has floated, then actively explored, then confirmed that a policy on rates caps was coming. And on Monday it landed.
While inflation and interest rates have been falling under our government, council rates have continued to shoot upwards. The average council rates increase for 2025 is 9.2%, which is 3 times annual inflation running at 3%. Rates are making up an increasing share of household bills, with some communities facing double-digit increases year after year. This is unsustainable, and it's adding significantly to the cost of living burden that Kiwis have been grappling with. The message we are hearing is clear: ratepayers are fed up. They're tired of having to prudently manage their own budgets while rates continue to go up, only to see their local council fail to demonstrate the same fiscal discipline.
Instead of a fixed cap on rates, the government has opted to go with a target band between 2 and 4%. 2% being the midpoint of the government's inflation target of 1 to 3%, the 4% based on long-run GDP. If councils want to go over that, they'll have to get permission from a regulator appointed by central government. And that'd only be for extreme cases, think natural disasters. And councils would also have to demonstrate to the regulator a plan to get back to the band. Local government minister Simon Watts was clear: if ratepayers are having to tighten their belts, so should councils.
The model that we're adopting, to our knowledge, is actually one of the first in the world to adopt, in effect, a range or a target range basis. We've taken considerable learnings from other jurisdictions of where it hasn't been effective. I think when you stand back and look at what we're doing here, first and foremost, we want to protect ratepayers. The fact of double-digit significant increase in gross, particularly those on fixed income, is just not sustainable and is not appropriate. The model we've put in place puts in place a range, and we believe that it will be able to derive a stable and positive outcome for ratepayers, and it is precedented on the model that the Reserve Bank used for inflation, and that is an effective mechanism as well.
The ranged model means rates freezes are off the cards, recognising councils still have to pay for the day-to-day.
It is simply acknowledging that actually there is a requirement for councils to invest and maintain assets that they have, and campaigning on 0% in the context of asset renewal was not necessarily going to be in the best interests of our long-term renewal. Some of the deficits that we were in the position of around infrastructure are a result of some of that aspect. Likewise, on the upper aspect, it's aligned with economic growth. Local government is an enabler of economic growth as well, and we want to make sure that they are also playing their part to support our broader growth agenda.
It boils down to central government's direction to local government to focus on the basics: water, roads, rubbish. Not $2 million toilet blocks, the Prime Minister's bête noire.
Building fancy public toilets rather than fixing the pipes. $2 million plus public toilet block with a light show, for goodness sake. Did you need to spend $2 million here in Wellington on a public toilet block? No.
In a way, it's come as a relief to local government New Zealand, which was fearing a hard cap. It says the rates band is pragmatic and more flexible, but Interim Chief Executive Scott Neckland still has worries.
We do remain concerned, though, that the ban will restrict critical investment in core services and infrastructure like roads and bridges and public transport. The government initially, when they indicated they were considering a rates cap, they had indicated that those core services and that critical investment would be exempt from the policy, so we have some concerns about that.
Wellington Mayor Andrew Little is sounding the alarm. He says all councils are struggling to keep their costs under control.
The risk that it runs is that councils that have had lower rates because they've just chosen not to spend on infrastructure maintenance and upgrades will continue on that, but all it means is those assets will deteriorate, and that'll create a crisis further down the track. And for those councils on higher levels of rates, the future rate increases might be limited, but whether or not that allows the council to meet the real increases in the cost of running a council organisation, doing the stuff of looking after a city, I think that remains to be seen. It's important that councils know that when they set rates, they're accountable for it. They're answerable to their electorate for it. But a rates capping process, I think, removes that accountability relationship and that responsibility to the electorate, because the rates cap itself becomes prescriptive, and councils get away with saying, well, that's what the government mandated, so that's what we're doing, and it doesn't bear any relation to what council actually needs to do.
Central Otago Mayor Tamer Ali's pretty fed up with the rhetoric that councils are just hurling money about.
Councils are committed to keeping rates as affordable as possible. For many councils, this idea that we are out throwing money around willy-nilly and wasting ratepayer dollars is not an accurate depiction of what happens.
She says absolutely it will work to reduce rates rises, but whether it'll lead to better services, probably not.
Councils will meet it because they would be required to meet it under legislation. It will mean that we are saying no to our communities more often, and it will mean that we are deferring projects that they wanted to see go ahead. But that might be okay if it means that they've got more money in their back pocket because their rates bills aren't rising at such a significant rate. So that's going to be the trade-off that our communities face, and they might be happy with that.
Another frustration is the policy will be pegged to inflation when the things councils are buying aren't exactly the grocery essentials, as Gisborne Mayor Rehet Stoltz points out.
We do not buy bananas, toilet paper and nappies. We buy asphalt, steel and concrete. And what you are saying now is that those inflationary increases and those specific projects don't always align with what we see with normal household CPI.
Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown was characteristically blunt.
Well, it's just not a good idea. If we had a rates cap of 2% this year, we would have a brand new city rail link with no trains and drivers in it. That would be clever, wouldn't it?
His deputy, Desley Simpson, is more measured, keen to work with central government on the bigger picture.
I suppose if I looked at it positively, I would say that, things are pretty tough for a lot of people out there. And the government's probably trying to minimise that pain and ensuring that, one of homeowners' biggest expenses, which is their rates, doesn't cause them too much grief. But the other side is that I think the Prime Minister has said something like, don't want them to make stupid decisions, councils to make stupid decisions. But even when rates are low, you can make stupid decisions to keep rates low, and it has long-term impacts. And in Auckland, in the first 6 years of Auckland Council, those rates were quite low, 2.5%, but Council never took any depreciation into account. So 6 years later, we were almost $2 billion behind because no one had built in depreciation. You would think that was pretty basic stuff to do. So I think there are pluses and minuses on both sides, and there may be other ways of ensuring that councils don't do dumb stuff. But as I said, the theory's really good, the devil's in the detail.
The Department of Internal Affairs says just 4 councils, the Whanganui and Waitomo District Councils and the Bay of Plenty and Northland Regional Councils, are projected to have rates increases below 4% in 2025 to 2026. So capping is a popular policy. The RNZ Reid Research poll in September showed 75% of people supported a rates cap. And many councils that were forecasting double-digit rates rises were punished at the local government elections, as ACT leader David Seymour points out.
I think the election results up and down the country showed that most people do want councils to better control their spending. Mayors who were tight on spending generally got re-elected. Mayors who were loose on spending generally didn't. And the people coming in, including some ACT local candidates, were people who want to be tight on spending. So the people are already demanding this. I think what's important is long-term predictability and certainty, and this policy will help with that.
One of those new mayors is Lydia Glidden, whose victory in Selwyn was widely seen as a ratepayer revolt against her predecessor Sam Broughton. She came in promising the next rates rise would be single-digit, but 2 to 4% may prove difficult for her fast-growing district. She told RNZ's Russell Palmer her council will have to adjust and look at its priorities.
I think we've actually got a prime opportunity, and I really want to see how the rest of the reforms that are coming out all line up as well, because, we've had the regional reform, we've got rates capping in, we're going to have RMA reform and the rest of the system improvement bill. And so it's really important to actually look at how they are all intertwined together, because there's going to be some impact from that if we've got rates capping and we're expected to do more with less.
Yeah, does that make it more difficult, or is it just kind of make sense in a way to do it all at the same time?
Look, to me, I think you do it all in one sweep. It's a lot, and it's a big workload, but you can see if you just drag things out, I don't think that's good for anyone either. And so, there is a real opportunity here to actually build what are our core functions. And so, that's where that system improvement bill will come in. These are our core functions. These are the things we must invest in and look after, and everything else is on the side. But if you look at regional government and what is happening there, where are those functions going to go with the RMA reform? So that's what's sitting in my mind at the moment, because if they got handed down to district councils, that's not going to be a good outcome there.
Yeah, and in terms of this band, I mean, is there a risk that it just kind of beds in the rates increases that councils have had in the past, where it's kind of like, some councils may have underinvested and then they've got, they've got a bit of a catch-up job to do, and they're not going to be able to do that with the kind of the rates increases that they, would be able to pass under these under this band?
Yes, I think it's a really interesting thing, because if you're constantly deferring maintenance, it's all going to catch up, isn't it? And I know they talked about using debt as a better tool, long-term funding, but, picking everything up isn't a good solution either, in my mind. Yes, we need to debt fund some core infrastructure, but we can't keep doing that, because you're passing the buck down to the next generation. So we're just going to be a wee bit smarter with what we do. But, I think there's good opportunity to talk to central government about this as well, and perhaps, we could have a conversation about not taking GST off rates, because that's a tax on a tax.
Councils have been clamouring for other forms of revenue, like tourist bed taxes, making the government repay GST on rates back to councils, or charging the government for rates on Crown land, none of which the government is interested in.
We haven't had those conversations at this point in time. We acknowledge that there might be, we're acknowledging that, we can have those conversations, but the point is we want councils to focus on the money that they've got and make sure they're doing a much better job of managing it. Some councils are doing a really good job. Some councils are doing a very, very poor job.
Consultation runs until February. Legislation will be introduced next year and come into law in January 2027. Despite the full regulatory model not taking effect until 2029, the government's encouraging councils to get within the band ASAP. Once that legislation comes in 2027, rates will be monitored. The government's warning it can intervene under the Local Government Act even before the regulator is in place. Of course, between now and 2027, there's an election, meaning Labour could halt it if it gets into power. The goal was left wide open for Labour to say whether they'd scrap it or what they'd do differently. But Labour's local government spokesperson, Tangi Utakere, couldn't commit.
This is a government that has very clearly indicated today that they are prepared to force costs for essential services like footpaths, rural roads, libraries and parks back onto councils without taking responsibility for that themselves.
Ratepayers already pay for those things through their rates. But it does raise the question whether councils will have to move to a user pays model for the essentials that aren't quite so essential.
There will be a change in terms of what communities will be paying for. At the moment, most communities are able to access libraries, access parks, sports grounds, footpaths, etc. Councils will be forced into prioritising things like possibly having to hike the fees for certain things, or indeed to cut services. And the conversations that I've had with the sector and out in the community is that I think communities would find it a very tough and bitter pill to swallow if suddenly they had to pay to go and use their local rose garden or local sports field that for years and years and years they've been able to freely access that.
That's something Wellington is already flagging.
If you're doing a band of the Minister talks about 2 to 4%, that's going to create great limits on what a council can do. It's not limited on charges it can pose elsewhere. And so councils may well have to look to that. That will have an impact on people's access to those facilities, where at the moment those facilities carry a bit of a cross-subsidy.
Water would be exempt. Because of the government's Local Water Done Well scheme, councils are looking at long-term debt financing for water and ring-fencing it separate from rates. There's a problem with that. Because water's exempt, the costs won't be capped, and that, Tamer Ali says, is something ratepayers will have to prepare for.
The reality is it doesn't include water infrastructure, which is one of our biggest costs here in Central Otago. People will need to understand that they will still be getting a separate bill for their water, and it's not going to be a small one.
In the end, it's not the rates freeze some may have been dreading, or hoping for. But councils will have to start making tough decisions, and ratepayers will notice the difference. Next week, the government will unveil its replacement to the Resource Management Act, the final jigsaw piece in the biggest overhaul to local government in a generation. That was Focus on Politics. Make sure to follow us in your favourite podcast app, or to get RNZ's political interviews and content from all our political podcasts in one place, follow and listen to the new Politics NZ feed. I'm Giles Dexter. Thanks for joining us. Mā te wā.